For 1,000 years, Lord Valerius lived as an immortal, and he had one single sacred rule: never get involved in the lives of mortals. You'd think being immortal would be great, right? Not for him. His eternity was a gilded cage, a lonely throne where he just watched. He saw empires rise from dust and turn to dust again, all while he remained unchanged, untouched, and totally alone. The other immortals were fine with their perfect, placid existence. But Valerius's heart was a storm, and his ageless eyes held a deep, secret sorrow. But down in a bustling mortal city, a spirit as free as the wind was about to ignite a fire in his timeless heart, a fire that would make him break every sacred vow and plunge the heavens into war. This is the story of a love that was never supposed to happen, a love that would challenge eternity itself. Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage of Eternity. Aethel, the immortal realm, was a place of impossible beauty, all crystalline spires and golden skies. For the immortals who lived there, it was paradise. For Lord Valerius, it was the prettiest prison ever built. His job was to watch the mortal realm and make sure the veil separating their worlds stayed intact. He was a silent, eternal guardian, and that was it. The sacred law was absolute. Thou shalt not touch, nor speak, nor shed a tear for the fleeting world. To interfere is to corrupt. To corrupt is to invite chaos. The law was enforced by the Celestial Council, led by the Archon Malachi. Malachi wasn't cruel, he was just absolute. To him, the law was the only thing keeping their eternal existence peaceful. The punishment for breaking it was severe. Not just death, but dissolution. Your immortal spirit would be unmade and scattered into the cosmos, a true final end. Valerius had done his job perfectly for a millennium. He was wise, powerful, and respected. He'd learned to detach himself, to see the vibrant, messy tapestry of mortal life as just an interesting story. Or so he told himself. But in the quiet of his citadel, a loneliness older than the stars gnawed at him. He'd seen all the patterns of human history, the cycles of war and peace, and it left him with a weariness that even immortal vitality couldn't fix. He yearned for something new, something real. He began to watch not as a guardian, but as a starving man watching a feast through a window, a longing so deep it became a constant, silent ache. Chapter 2. A spirit of fleeting beauty. Far below, in the gloriously chaotic city of Silverwood, Lyra lived a life that was the complete opposite of Valerius's. She wasn't a princess or a warrior, she was a restorer of old things. She spent her days in a dusty workshop that smelled of old paper and wood varnish, mending broken pottery and rebinding crumbling books. To others, it was junk. To her, they were stories waiting to be told again. Lyra's spirit was as untamed as her fiery red hair. She was fiercely independent with a boundless curiosity that often got her into trouble. Where others saw boundaries, Lyra saw invitations. She questioned everything, from the price of bread to the ancient legends of silent, watchful gods. Her laughter was loud, and her heart was open to the small wonders of her world, the taste of the first spring strawberries, or the warmth of the sun after a rainstorm. She lived with her ailing grandmother, whose memories were fading like old ink. "Every life is a story," her grandmother would whisper. "Make yours a grand one, little bird." And Lyra was trying. She filled her days with purpose, with connection, with the messy, beautiful, heartbreaking business of being mortal. She painted the faces of people in the market, trying to capture a flicker of joy or sorrow in their eyes. She felt everything so deeply, a stark contrast to the immortal who had taught himself to feel nothing at all. Chapter 3. The Inciting Incident. A Crack in Forever. Of course, Lyra's fascination with forgotten things eventually led her somewhere she wasn't supposed to go, the Whisperwood. It was a forest at the edge of the city, and it was strictly forbidden. Legends said it was a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Most people were terrified of it. Lyra was captivated. A rotten old map she'd found spoke of a sunken temple of the Veil Watcher, a ruin older than the city itself. One crisp autumn afternoon, she just couldn't resist. She ignored the warnings and ventured into the woods. She found it, just as the map promised. A crumbling stone archway half swallowed by moss and ivy. Up in his citadel, Valerius felt the disturbance. A mortal had crossed into a place of power. Normally, this wasn't a big deal. The mortal would get scared and leave. But as he focused his sight, he saw her. He saw the determined set of her jaw, the glint of excitement in her eyes as she lit a lantern and walked into the darkness. And for some reason, he found himself unable to look away. Inside, the temple was a maze of crumbling corridors. Deeper within, she found a circular chamber with a faint, ethereal light pulsing from the floor. It was a dormant ward, a piece of ancient, immortal magic. What she didn't know was that her mortal presence, so full of life, was waking it up. The light flared. Glyphs on the walls began to glow. The dormant ward reacted to her life force as if it were a hostile attack. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Dust rained down. A massive stone block, dislodged by the magical feedback, began to fall, and it was heading right for her. Valerius watched, his eternal calm shattered. The law was clear. Do not interfere. Let her die. Her death would be just one of billions he had witnessed. But looking at her face, turned upwards in shock, he saw not just a mortal, but a spirit, a fire. The thought of that fire being extinguished was, for the first time in centuries, unbearable. In a fraction of a second, he made a choice. He broke the law. He didn't appear or speak. He just reached out with his will, a tiny thread of his immense power crossing the veil. This thread of silver energy wrapped around the falling stone, not stopping it, but shifting its path just enough. The massive block crashed to the ground a foot to Lyra's left, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The force of the impact threw her off her feet, her head hitting the stone floor. The last thing she saw before passing out was a shimmering, silver light fading into nothing. Chapter 4. The Haunting Echo. Lyra woke up hours later, cold, bruised, and with a killer headache. The chamber was silent. She had no memory of how she survived. The shattered block was proof she shouldn't have. All she had was this strange, lingering image in her mind, a flash of impossible silver light and an overwhelming feeling not of being saved, but of being seen, truly seen. She scrambled out of the ruins and back to the city, but the experience left its mark. She tried to dismiss it, but the feeling lingered. She became obsessed, poring over old legends, searching for any mention of a veil watcher or a spirit of silver light. For Valerius, the consequences were immediate. That small act of interference had created a connection, a bond. He was now tethered to her, not by magic, but by his choice. He found himself watching her constantly. He saw her work, her brow furrowed in concentration. He heard her laugh with friends, a sound that felt like warmth on his eternally cool skin. He began to break the law in smaller, more subtle ways. When a thief tried to snatch her purse, a cobblestone would mysteriously trip him up. When a fever swept her neighborhood, he'd guide a cool breeze through her window. Useless little gestures he couldn't stop himself from making. He knew he was walking a path to his own destruction. The council wouldn't be blind forever, but he couldn't stop. He was terrified of the punishment that awaited him, but a deeper terror was the thought of ever going back to the silent, empty nothingness of his life before he saw her. He had to know her. This obsession was a fire, and he knew he was about to let it burn everything down. Chapter 5. Whispers Across Worlds. The temptation became too much. He couldn't just watch anymore. One night, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, he didn't descend in a blaze of glory, he simply stepped through. One moment he was in his cold citadel, the next he was standing in the mortal world, in the quiet, moonlit garden behind Lyra's workshop. Lyra was there, unable to sleep. She felt a sudden stillness in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. She turned, and her own breath caught in her throat. He stood by the old stone well. He wasn't glowing, but he seemed to soak up the moonlight. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes that looked woven from shadows, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of a winter storm, and in them, she saw an ancient sadness, a loneliness so vast it seemed to hold millennia. She wasn't afraid. She felt a shocking, bizarre sense of recognition. "You," she whispered. "It was you." In the temple, Valerius had planned what to say. He'd rehearsed speeches, but seeing her there, so real, so fragile, so alive, every word evaporated. "Yes," he said. His voice was like the quiet rumble of distant thunder. It was the first word he'd spoken to a mortal in 1,000 years, and it felt like both a crime and a prayer. Their first conversations were magnetic. He was cautious, revealing little. She, in typical fashion, was relentless with questions. Who was he? What was he? Instead of being terrified by the truth, she was fascinated. To her, a being who had seen all of history wasn't a monster. He was the ultimate story. Their secret meetings became a ritual. They would talk for hours in the dead of night. He, who knew everything, found himself hanging on her every word as she described the simple joys of her life. In return, he started telling her about his. He described the skies of Athel and told her stories of forgotten kings, not as legends, but as memories. He'd show her small glimpses of his power, making a dead rose in her garden bloom again in the moonlight. With every secret they shared, the bond deepened. They were falling in love, and they were both terrifyingly aware that every moment they spent together was an act of rebellion, a step closer to a war they could not possibly win. Chapter 6. The Unspoken Vow. The garden became their sanctuary, a pocket of reality where two worlds could touch. One night, the air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Valerius had just conjured a shimmer of starlight in his palm, a miniature galaxy swirling for her amusement. Lyra, mesmerized, reached out and traced the lines on his hand. Her touch was warm, real, a jolt against his ancient coolness. The space between them vanished. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a fleeting mortal he was forbidden to touch. He saw his reason for being. His hands, which had held the power to shape continents, trembled as he cupped her face. "Lyra," he whispered, her name an admission of a love that had already condemned him. She didn't need words. She leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a collision of forever and now. His kiss held the quiet depth of 1,000 lonely nights, and hers held the fierce, brilliant fire of a life lived to its fullest. He led her from the garden into the warm chaos of her workshop. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. There, among the half-finished stories of broken things, they made an unspoken vow. Their clothes fell away, one woven from shadows, the other simple mortal cloth. For him, it was the first time in an age he had allowed himself to be truly vulnerable, to feel skin against his own. For her, it was an act of ultimate trust, embracing a being of myth and legend. Their union was a fusion of two worlds. He moved with a reverence, as if worshipping the beautiful, fragile strength of her mortality. Every touch was a discovery, the pulse of her blood a wild, frantic song against the silent, steady rhythm of his own immortal heart. He tasted the salt on her skin, a flavor more profound than any ambrosia of the gods. She, in turn, explored the vast, lonely landscape of his being, feeling the immense power he held in check, the deep well of sorrow he had carried for so long. It was a silent conversation where their bodies spoke of longing, of sacrifice, and of a love that was both a divine heresy and their truest salvation. In the quiet aftermath, wrapped in each other's arms, they were no longer an immortal and a mortal. They were simply two souls who had found their other half in the most impossible of places. Chapter 7. The Point of No Return. The real turning point, the act that shattered all pretense, wasn't some grand defiance. It was an intimate, human tragedy. Lyra's grandmother took a sudden turn for the worse. The healers could do nothing. Her life was simply fading. Lyra was devastated. She sat by her grandmother's bedside, holding her frail hand, her own vibrant spirit crushed. Valerius watched from the shadows, his heart aching with a pain that was entirely new to him. He understood loss as a concept, but feeling Lyra's grief as if it were his own was an agony beyond anything he'd ever known. That night, Lyra finally broke. Sobbing, she fled to the garden where Valerius was waiting. "I can't lose her," she choked out. "She's all I have left. It's not fair." Valerius looked at her, and the 1,000-year-old immortal made a decision he knew would unravel his world. What was his eternity worth if he couldn't use it to protect the one thing that gave it meaning? "There is a way," he said softly, the words tasting like treason. "But the cost is everything." He explained that he could share a fraction of his own life force. A tiny spark of his eternal energy could mend her grandmother's body and grant her a few more years. But it was a forbidden act of the highest order. It wouldn't just be noticed. It would be a beacon, a scream of defiance that the council could not ignore. Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with a terrible hope. She understood the sacrifice, but faced with the imminent death of the woman who raised her, she made the selfish, loving, human choice. She nodded. He led her back inside. Standing over the frail woman, Valerius took Lyra's hand. She felt a powerful warmth flow through her and into her grandmother. A faint, silver light enveloped the old woman, and her shallow, ragged breaths were replaced by the deep, steady rhythm of peaceful sleep. The moment it was done, a tremor shook the very foundations of Aethel. On his throne, Archon Malachi's serene expression hardened into cold, righteous fury. The beacon had been lit. The traitor had been found. Chapter 8. The War Begins. The Council's revenge wasn't swift. It was insidious and cruel. Their goal wasn't just to punish Valerius, but to prove that the mortal world was a source of chaos, and that attachment to it only led to suffering. It began subtly. A blight fell upon the fields surrounding Silverwood. The river turned sluggish and brackish. Then came a sickness, a creeping fatigue that settled into the city, draining its strength and hope. Valerius and Lyra felt every tragedy like a physical blow. They knew it was their fault. The people of Silverwood, desperate and afraid, began looking for someone to blame. And the whispers eventually aimed at Lyra. Her grandmother's impossible recovery no longer looked like a miracle. It looked like dark witchcraft. Friends shunned her. Stones were thrown at her workshop. The city she called home had become a cage. Valerius was trapped in a hell of his own making. He was powerful enough to level mountains, yet he was helpless to stop the slow decay of the city and the isolation of the woman he loved. But Lyra refused to break. "This is not your fault," Valerius told her one night, offering to surrender himself to end it. "No," Lyra said, her gaze fierce. "We chose this. Surrendering is what they want. They want you to abandon me, to prove that a mortal's love is a weakness. We will not prove them right." Her strength solidified his resolve. The war had come to their doorstep, and they would fight it together. The council wanted to prove the frailty of the mortal world. Valerius and Lyra would show them its resilience. Chapter 9. The Climax. The Siege of Souls. Archon Malachi grew impatient. He decided the lesson needed a brutal conclusion. He would descend himself, not to destroy Valerius, but to personally unmake the source of his corruption, Lyra. The sky above Silverwood ripped open. From the tier, Archon Malachi descended, a figure of blinding white light. Panic erupted. Valerius appeared in the city square, placing himself between Malachi and Lyra's workshop. "This is between you and me, Malachi," he projected. "You are mistaken," Malachi's voice echoed in their minds. "You are a symptom. The disease is mortality itself. I am here to cauterize the wound." The battle began. Valerius fought with the fury of a man with something to lose, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. Lyra, watching from her window, refused to be a damsel in distress. Her mind raced. She remembered the carvings in the sunken temple. The Veil Watchers weren't just jailers. They were conduits, meant to balance the energies between realms. An idea, desperate and insane, took root. She grabbed her satchel and ran for the Whisperwood. Valerius was on his knees, his energy depleted. Malachi raised a hand of light for the final blow. "Now, watch as your attachment is erased," he stated, turning his attention to Lyra's workshop. At that exact moment, a pulse of raw, chaotic energy erupted from the Whisperwood. In the heart of the sunken temple, Lyra had deliberately overloaded the ancient ward, pouring her own fierce mortal spirit into its core. She'd turned the celestial security system into a magical bomb. The feedback loop gave Valerius the opening he needed. With a final, desperate roar, he didn't attack Malachi. He flew towards the blinding tear in the sky, the gateway to Aethel. He was threatening to pour his own law-breaking energy directly into the gateway, an act that could poison their home realm for centuries. It was a stalemate. Malachi could destroy Lyra, but Valerius could irrevocably damage Aethel. For the first time, a flicker of something other than certainty appeared in Malachi's light. "Enough," his voice boomed. The war, for now, was over. He couldn't risk his home. With a final look of cold fury, the Archon and his warriors retreated, sealing the sky behind them. Chapter 10. The Ashes of Victory. The Resolution. Victory felt a lot like defeat. Valerius fell from the sky, spent. Lyra stumbled out of the woods, weak. They had won, but the cost was immense. Valerius was now a traitor, an outcast, exiled. Lyra, though a savior to some, was feared by many more. They were together, but more alone than ever. Then came a new, more terrible truth. Valerius wasn't healing. The act of pouring his essence into the gateway, of sharing his life force, had fundamentally damaged his connection to his immortality. The eternal flame within him was fading. He confessed this to Lyra as they sat watching a sunset. "When I fought Malachi," he said quietly, "I shattered something inside me, the part of me that is timeless. I am unwinding." He was becoming mortal. Lyra looked at him, this ancient being now facing the one thing he never had to before, an end. You'd think she would be devastated. The powerful, immortal lord she fell in love with was fading, but she wasn't. She reached out and took his hand. "How long?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Valerius admitted. "Decades. A lifetime. A mortal lifetime." A smile touched Lyra's lips. "Then we had better not waste it." Their life together wasn't an epic poem. It was a simple, quiet story. They left Silverwood and found a small cottage by the sea. Valerius, for the first time, learned to live, not just exist. He who had watched empires fall learned how to plant a garden. He who had commanded cosmic energies learned the satisfaction of building a chair with his own hands. He experienced sunburn, weariness, and the profound joy of waking up next to the woman he loved. Lyra, in turn, found a peace she'd never known. She continued to restore old things, but her greatest restoration project was him. She taught him how to truly laugh. As years passed, Lines of age began to trace themselves on Valerius's face. His hair showed threads of silver that weren't from starlight, but from time. He grew old, and he did it with a grace and wonder she had never seen. He had traded 1,000 years of lonely reign for 50 years of a messy, beautiful, ordinary life, and he never once regretted it. He had fought a war for a love that defied eternity, but in the end, he discovered true eternity wasn't in endless years. It was in a love so powerful it could make a single, fleeting lifetime feel infinite. Their story became a whispered legend, not of a celestial war, but of a love that bridged two worlds. It's the story of an immortal lord who gave up forever for a handful of precious years, and a mortal woman who showed him that one lifetime, lived with love, was worth more than an eternity alone. They proved that the greatest power in the universe isn't immortality, but the courage to embrace a beautiful, fleeting, and perfectly finite life. If their story of sacrifice and love moved you, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell for more tales of magic, destiny, and the enduring power of the human heart. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let us know. What would you risk for a love that defies eternity? Thanks for watching. See you in my next.